I'm Daniel James, and you're listening to 7am. The Liberal Party has begun asking what it needs to do to modernise. Its answer, so far, is Tony Abbott. As Angus Taylor tries to put some distance between the coalition and One Nation, Pauline Hanson's party has had a week that looks less like a political revolution and more like a holiday gone wrong. Meanwhile, away from the political theatre, do the economics of cuts to migration numbers economically stack up at a time when one of the country's most important systems is still failing the people it's meant to care for? Today, federal political correspondent for The Age and Sydney Morning Herald, Natassia Chrysanthos, on the Liberal Party's identity crisis, One Nation's fortunes, and an aged care system still not fit for purpose. It's Saturday, July 18. Natassia, this week Angus Taylor finally ruled out a coalition with One Nation, although Sarah Ferguson on 7:30 really had to push him hard to do it.
Don't Liberal voters have a right to know that this party that would cause, as you describe it, an eternity of pain is one you would never form government with under any circumstances?
Well, as I say, we've got absolutely no plan to form government with a party.
It's not quite the same as ruling it out, is what I'm looking for.
You know, as I say, I want a coalition with the National Party.
Why do you think he's been dancing around the question for so long?
I think Taylor in particular has found it very difficult to land the right notes here.
I'm ruling it out. There's no plan. There's no plan.
You're ruling it out.
Well, there is no plan. I can tell you right now.
I think we've seen a lot of the kind of One Nation attack lines outsourced to other members of the party. And I think part of that is as the leader, you know, he wants to appeal to as broad a voter base as possible. But I think what people have picked up on is it has seemed somewhat weak.
And I have been very clear about this 100 times. I don't know how many times, but many, many times. And I think the other thing we've seen is it hasn't really been working. The coalitions continue to lose ground to One Nation in the polls. I think there's been a lot of internal kind of push to take a harder line against One Nation. You've obviously had some coalition MPs entertain this idea of an alliance, for example, Tony Abbott, the South Australian frontbencher. And then you've had a lot of other people quite frustrated by that tactic, saying, you know, the election's not for another couple of years. We can't throw in the towel now. So I think we've seen Taylor kind of this week adopt that stance. Whether it's a little too late to be fully compelling at this stage, I'm not sure. But I think it was probably time for him to articulate a stronger position. And I guess now at least we've seen that definitive stance from him.
Yeah, how much have the internal machinations within the Liberal Party played on Angus Taylor coming to this position, particularly around Andrew Hastie's position, a potential rival to the leadership, who has been very hardline on his stance against One Nation? How much do you think that is driving this shift, not only for the Liberal Party, but particularly for Angus Taylor?
I think for the party and for its MPs, it is a really active debate, right? Like there's no blueprint for them in how to get through this. I think you've had competing views. You've got, the side that thinks a more conciliatory or collaborative approach with One Nation might be the way to go. And then you've got the Hastie camp, which is this language of we don't bend the knee. You know, it's Taylor's decision as the leader to chart those waters and to figure out the best way to do it. And I think they've obviously come to a position that they need to be firmer. The outgoing campaign director, Andrew Hurst, a few weeks ago as well, made that very clear in his final address to the Liberal Party when he said, you know, One Nation are not our friends and we can't treat them as such. So I think those warnings have been coming from different parts of the party quite loudly. And then I think both, you know, with Taylor finally ruling that out and also a speech he gave about One Nation where he kind of explained, you know, how much One Nation will cost the nation.
They'll blow up the joint.
Yeah, exactly.
The Liberal Party's been doing some further soul searching this week with the release of a discussion paper throwing around some ideas to rebuild the party after back-to-back election disasters. What does the paper identify as the party's biggest problem?
The things that it's identified year after year after year, really. This paper has picked up on the theme of the last election review. It has long-term structural issues with membership, with young people, with women, and also the issue with multicultural communities. And I think previous election reviews have picked up specifically on, the Chinese diaspora and that being a problem for the Liberal Party. So in some ways, it's kind of nothing new to see here. It's rehashing a lot of these structural issues. I think the problem for the coalition in the last 6 months in particular, as this One Nation vote in the polls has soared, is that it's kind of become clear that young people, multicultural communities, women go to how do we grow our vote share and grow our party and its support. The One Nation phenomenon changed that dynamic, and the question instead became, how do we consolidate our support base and stop it bleeding? And I think in some ways they're actually quite different questions with quite different strategies, and that's why I think we've not seen this active effort from the Parliamentary Liberal Party in the last 6 months to chase those other demographics, because it's been so concerned with shoring up what remains of its support base.
And so, Natassia, while this has been happening, all these discussions are taking place, including around how the party engages better with multicultural communities and gets their support, the party's new president, Tony Abbott, released a video called "Diversity is Not Our Strength," arguing that multiculturalism has failed.
Now, for many years, migrants to Australia were expected to integrate from day one and to assimilate as soon as possible. Lately, though, under the doctrine of multiculturalism, migrants have been encouraged to keep their culture. Indeed,
how can the party rebuild trust with multicultural voters when its own president is making that argument?
That's the question, isn't it? We had Angus Taylor kind of dance around this question of multiculturalism a couple of weeks ago, kind of came back to it with, what is now a stated support for Australian multiculturalism. But I think then you get to a credibility gap, right? And I think that's what the Liberals have kind of been dealing with for the last many years, is you can talk the talk at certain points and say, we support a version of multiculturalism, etc. But there have obviously been moves, commentary that have undermined that over time. The other thing that is interesting to me is, we had Susan, just talking about some of these issues, women, multicultural communities, younger people, the sensible centre, if you like. When Susan Lee came into the leadership a year ago, that was very much where she was pitching herself. We had her kind of trying really hard with a charm offensive in the Indian diaspora community, for example, after the turbulence with the Jacinta Price comments. And we had Susan Lee and her front bench kind of go forward and really try to engage with the Indian community. Now we're so much kind of further beyond that with Angus Taylor, and Angus Taylor's also made very strong comments on immigration and multiculturalism. He's kind of repeated commentary about, standards being too low, what he says about migrants from liberal democracy backgrounds being better fits for Australia. I think all of that does probably create a sense of unease, and we've heard it from multicultural leaders across the community, that they do feel kind of targeted or disparaged by that rhetoric. So again, it doesn't seem like that's what the party's really trying to do at this point in appealing to those voters.
Coming up, the politics of migration meets economic reality. Natassia, policy-wise, an area that the coalition is mirroring One Nation is migration, promising a lower intake. But you've done some excellent reporting on the economics of cutting immigration this week, and you found that cutting immigration could actually cost billions. What did the costings show?
Yeah, so these are the costings from the Parliamentary Budget Office, which is basically modelled the fiscal impact of migration. I think the key takeout is, in general, migration is good for the economy because migrants tend to be working age. They've kind of done their education abroad. They come in and they, over their lifetime, tend to pay more tax than they receive in government benefits. So that's kind of one lens. And it does show that if you were to implement, a drastic cut to immigration, the coalition's position could be about 100,000 people less
than what we've got now. That would run into the cost of tens of billions over the forward estimates. One Nation's kind of got a net zero migration figure.
The net zero they believe in.
The one net zero they believe in, which would cost even more. Now, of course, budget impact isn't the only reason. You've got to look at infrastructure, capacity, demographics, social cohesion, and that's obviously part of the picture, and it's an important part of the picture. But even so, if you are a party that does come with a policy of cutting migration, I think it just shows that does need to be offset elsewhere. And so there's a budget management question there for One Nation and also for Angus Taylor at the same time that he's promising, for example, to end bracket creep. That's another very costly policy. So the question closer to the election will be, how do you pay for all of this stuff? And I think that's an issue that Peter Dutton ran into at the last election as well, was making this lower numbers immigration policy square with economic reality, basically.
Natassia, this week Pauline Hanson was seen holidaying with Gina Rinehart in southern Italy in what could only be described as the worst series of White Lotus ever. It's not exactly the battler image that Pauline Hanson's been trying to portray for herself, is it?
No, it's not. Lounging on a several $1,000s a night Sicilian deck.
Fresh from an interview with Tommy Robertson.
Yeah. She has kind of flaunted this relationship with Gina Rinehart and her plane and all of this stuff over the last 6 months. That hasn't really seemed to hurt her. I do wonder if the bigger issue maybe with this European trip and the questions being raised around political judgment, whether Europe is where Hanson should be right now, jaunting around, or whether she should be consolidating her lead in the polls and speaking to Australians. And I think maybe that is more of the perception issue.
There's also been some reports of some internal ructions, particularly with Pauline Hanson describing her daughter Lee as a potential future One Nation leader, which apparently put Barnaby Joyce's nose out of place. Are we beginning to see the wheels fall off One Nation, or is it too early to tell?
I think it's too early to tell, but it's certainly getting bumpy. And I think this was always going to happen. I remember when post the Farrer by-election, when UMP David Farley came to Parliament, there was a press conference that Hanson held with her new expanded team. And it was the first time that I'd ever seen a One Nation press conference attract a full court of press. And it got very messy very quickly.
Senator Roberts, in an interview on a YouTube channel a couple of weeks ago, you were asked about whether you thought the Bondi terror attack was a false flag. You said, I doubt it was a false flag, but you went on to say, I don't know the facts yet, I'm not ruling it out.
Because as we've seen, and especially with Malcolm Roberts, this is a senator who's been espousing some quite fringe views and talking about conspiracies for quite a few years now.
Sure, two things. First of all, it's an absurd proposition. Second thing is that I reinforce the fact that I make decisions and statements based on data, and I don't have data on that.
Sorry, there was no justification. I can speak up for Senator Roberts with regard to this, no, because it was totally taken out of context. We have shown ourselves...
No one's really applied the blowtorch to that because it hasn't seemed electorally relevant, but that dynamic's now changed. And so, the questions are coming from all over the place when it comes to Hanson and her crew, and I think... reining that in, keeping it tight, keeping it focused, and then looking like a party that could form government is going to be a challenge. And I think we'll see more of that probing. And the other thing is, in Parliament, everyone's in competition. It's usually, Labor and the Coalition turning their focus to each other. But now both those parties are also turning their focus to One Nation. Like, we will continue to see quite a lot of scrutiny placed on One Nation, and given, a lot of Barnaby Joyce is a very experienced politician, the rest not so much. So how they kind of stand up to that increased level of scrutiny, it will be really interesting.
We'll be here for it. Before we let you go, Natassia, Labor inherited an aged care system that had been condemned by a Royal Commission and made fixing it one of its central promises. But this week, the outgoing aged care watchdog said she believes Labor's reforms are harming some of the older people they were designed to help. What's going wrong with aged care?
So Labor's attempted a kind of funding reset or overhaul, if you will, of the aged care system. The impetus for that is that we do have an ageing population who will demand more care, particularly in the next decade, and that's a huge demographic shift. So what Labor's done is kind of introduce a user pays
model, where for some elements of home care and aged care now, people with the means are expected to pay more for their care. We're also seeing a trend broadly of people wanting to stay at home as they age. Part of that is, it's a lot of people's preference, and for the government, that's also important because there's not residential aged care beds for everyone. I think the health minister says that you'd need to be building, an aged care facility every 3 days to keep up with demand. What we heard from the Aged Care Inspector General, who's leaving her post at the end of the month, so she was kind of free to speak as candidly as she wanted, a rare opportunity for a public servant. Her take was that the focus on residential aged care in the first place is not right. She thinks that home care that kind of centres the rights and independence of the individual is where policy needs to be. And her argument was that this new user pays model, which is affecting a lot of pensioners and semi-pensioners, risks having a detrimental effect in the long run, because once you make people pay for things, they're less likely to take those things out. And so what she thinks that will do is disincentivise people to seek care at home until the point that you do end up pushing everyone into residential aged care. At that point, they are older and sicker, and residential aged care is more expensive, so it's also more expensive to the taxpayer. There has been this issue with home care packages as well, this huge bottleneck, because there is so much demand. The government's argument is there's not really the workforce there, and that they are bringing hundreds of thousands of home care packages online. So they're doing something to a system they say has been neglected. But, there are these kind of broader structural trends and challenges that I think perhaps the government talks about in a way that does frame it as a problem. I think the Aged Care Inspector General was saying that fatalism doesn't serve anyone. So she wants to see more investment and a rethink of that consumer co-contribution model.
If we do have problems with an aged care workforce, where will we get that workforce from, Natassia? It's a rhetorical question. You don't have to answer it. But thank you so much for...
Rewind 20 minutes to our migration conversation and we can keep going in circles, hey?
Natassia, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Seven AM is a daily show from Solstice Media. It's made by Ariel Richards, Atticus Bastow, Chris Dengate, Crystal Keller, Renee Auckland, Ruby Jones, Travis Evans, Zoltan Fetcho Jr. and me, Daniel James. Our theme music is by Ned Beckley and Josh Hogan of Envelope Audio. Have yourself a great weekend, and if you haven't already, you can follow 7am on Instagram and subscribe on YouTube. And if you're feeling particularly generous, you can also leave us a review. It helps other people find the podcast.